All right, we're going to get started here in a minute. Oops, let's just admit these people. All right, we're going to get started here in just a moment. Thanks for joining. Hello, hello. Make sure that everybody gets on here and that the technology is working. I think that we're streaming. I think that the people are here and the audio is working. Let me double check that with the. And guys on my team, you can hear me, right?
Loud and clear.
Great. All right. Well, this is a odd time on a Friday afternoon. We're going to not take up any more of your time than we need to. So we're just going to get started. There'll be a recording, of course, available afterwards. So we're going to get going here. And thanks for joining. And what we're going to talk about today is a continuation of the conversation that we started a couple of days ago. And in that conversation, hold on, I've got slides here to help you follow along. Let's do it like this for now. 1 second. Here we go. There's what I need. Yeah. Last time, what we talked about was why personalized experiences win and why they're about to explode in popularity, why every one of your competitors is going to be, and yourself are going to be able to have access to one of these for your business in the next year or so, and why it's important to be thinking about bringing that technology into your business, because those experiences are so much more compelling to your prospects and customers that they win every single time. And as this technology becomes simpler and simpler to use, they're going to proliferate in a way that we haven't yet seen. And so it's going to be important for you to be thinking ahead about how to leverage this stuff in your business. So what can you do to create these kind of streamlined, really slick, personalized web experiences that have customers feel like they're being taken care of in a way that they couldn't otherwise be in kind of that old school one-off experience that we used to be able to deliver before software took over the world. What I want to do today is sort of continue that conversation, and you guys are on these admitting people as they come. Let's see. Today, I want to talk about 4 core concepts behind all personalized web apps. I know that some of the people on this call are going to be, engineers, and you guys are going to be like, "This is obvious. We already know this stuff." If that is how you feel when we're going through this over the next 45 minutes or so, then just hang on, because at the end, I'm going to give you some clues about what we've been working on at Ontraport and over the last year or so. And we're not going to get into it deep. That'll be for the next call. But I'll give you some clues about what we've been working on, and you'll be interested to see that. For many of us, though, we think about a web app, and the concept is kind of nebulous. We're not really sure exactly what that means. We have a sense, of course, we use web apps all the time, so we have a sense of what a web app is. But in terms of like what goes into creating that, how those things are really put together, those concepts can be a little bit cloudy. And when those concepts are cloudy, it's really sort of hard to begin to imagine for yourself how, what is even possible for my business? How what could I do? How do these things come together in a way that I can use them? And until you're able to imagine kind of the behind the scenes of how these things kind of work, it's just really hard to begin to brainstorm use cases for your own business. And so that's kind of what I want to get at today, is to get behind the technology a little bit and to show you kind of how the web works. And I think it'll be interesting because we're going to use a lot of examples from apps that you're familiar with. And what you'll see is that they are using the same kind of technologies over and over again. Remember in the last conversation, what we talked about was was how it's kind of like three chords and the truth. If you're a musician, you learn to play G, C, and E. You've got a lot of songs under your belt that you can play with just those three chords. And it turns out that software is a lot the same. There's actually kind of a limited number of features and functionality that go into 85% of the apps that are out there in the world, and even behind those, there's fewer technologies. So what do I mean when I talk about web apps? And just by the way, again, thanks for joining. We do have some people manning the chat, the online chat here. So if you have something to say or have a question, we've got Pete on the scene, and he can help you. I'm going to try to not pay attention to that and pay attention to the camera instead. So what is a web app? Well, we sort of know, obviously, that like Facebook, Instagram, Airbnb, WhatsApp, OpenTable, Betterment, some of the stuff we talked about last week, Noom, that diet app. These are not static websites. That's not just simple bunch of pages. There's a real interactivity there. There's real personalization there. There's actually a service that's being performed in a lot of these cases. And so we have a sense that these are different sort of beasts from the websites that we're used to building and visiting. But when you kind of peer through the surface layer, what you'll start to see is that those apps are actually made up of a handful of features that you guys are going to all be familiar with. You've seen these over and over again in 1,000 different apps, right? Things like login, right? And maybe creating a profile and viewing and update your profile, maybe adding and editing records, maybe playing video or audio, messaging, friends and followers, right? Checking in, tickets, registration, mapping, liking things, voting on things, upvoting, downvoting, right? Getting notifications, progress bars, subscribing to things, favoriting. You guys can read this stuff. Checkout, search, filter, search, sort, and filter. Things like suggestions, suggested for you, and of course the ubiquitous feed, right? The wall, the Instagram scrolling of pictures, or the Facebook wall, right? These are all features that you've seen in permuted in 1,000 different ways in all kinds of apps, right? And in fact, if you imagine those are sort of the building blocks of web applications, you can start to go like, oh, I could do this, I could do that, right? If I had these as sort of Legos that I could put together for an app. Now, what you want to see is a little more than just that, because that's still a bunch of stuff, and each one of those things is kind of a project. Actually, it turns out there's kind of another layer under that there's some fundamental technologies that actually allow you to sort of build all this stuff. And so I want to kind of get into that next layer down. That's what we're going to talk about today. So let's use an example that we're maybe all familiar with, Airbnb. Airbnb is, I'm going to flip this around. I'm going to get small and let Airbnb get big. There we go. Airbnb. We know what Airbnb is, right? And we can kind of imagine what that experience is. Maybe you've used it, maybe you're a host. But if you look at this pretty graphic that one of our design team members put together, that kind of represents the Airbnb screen, right? If that thing on the right here is kind of a map. And when you go to the Airbnb homepage, down the left, you get a bunch of listings, right? And when you click on one of those listings, you get this page over here. And it's kind of this thing at the top, which has the images, and then down in the middle where the green is here is the description of the home, and talks about the host, and it talks about the reviews, and maybe some more photos and stuff like that. And then this little waffle thing kind of is meant to represent the calendar that shows the availability and stuff like that, right? So this is stuff that you're familiar with. And all of this stuff, of course, is public on the web, right? You don't need to log in to see all this stuff. You can just click around Airbnb like a searchable database of records and see all this stuff. But if you do log in, there's more stuff that you can see, right? You can go into your own history and see my reservations. You can see maybe the payments you've made, stuff like that, right? Messages that you've exchanged back and forth with hosts. Is everybody with me? Yes. Then you also have, if you kind of dig in a little deeper, once you've logged in, you might find out that there's a page that sort of represents a single reservation, right? So I made a reservation, and that reservation is kind of linked to all this other data, right? It shows the property that you reserved and maybe the messages back and forth with the host, and maybe you can click off to the host's page, and maybe there's some payment history, and so there's a page that kind of like shows all that, right? And so you guys are kind of familiar with how Airbnb works enough. Obviously, there's more to Airbnb than just this, but this is a big part of our day-to-day experience using the platform, right? All right, so clearly this is more than a website. This is like an app that provides a service, right? So we're going to use this Airbnb app as an example as we talk about some of these concepts. So the first concept I want to talk about is templates and data-driven web pages. Now, we talked yesterday about, or well, I guess it was a couple of days ago, about how everybody is calling themselves no-code web app builders today. Even I think yesterday or something like that, Jotform announced a new no-code web app builder. But there's a distinction between what I'm talking about and what they're talking about. Because a big part of web apps is actually being able to take data and from the web and display it onto the internet, right? So what am I talking about? Let's take a look at a specific Airbnb listing. So this is a listing that we're all familiar with, somewhere in a cave. You can go stay in a cave. And what we have here is the images. We just kind of talked about this layout. We have the images, and then we have the some information about the listing there on the left, the title of the listing at the top. We've got a bunch of reviews and some roll-ups and a way to reserve it and stuff like that, right? Now, hopefully it's obvious that Airbnb does not have a team of 10,000 web page builders building these pages by hand. Right? This wasn't done the way, if you go into Entreport today and you wanted to build this page, you would have to drag the images onto the page and you would type out the title and, you know what I'm talking about? That's kind of like how you would build this page by hand. Of course, with Airbnb, there are like 10 trillion listings on there. And so it would be impossible to build all those just by hand. So they don't have like an ant army of web page builders creating these pages and updating them every time somebody wants to change their photos or whatever. Of course, that's not how it's done. Instead, how it's done is that there is like a database of listings, right? And I know that when people hear the word database, some of you are like, oh yeah, I'm a database engineer. The rest of us are like, our eyes roll back in our heads a little bit. And you're like, oh my God, you're not going to talk about databases, are you? But a database is really just like a spreadsheet. It's a fancy, fast spreadsheet. It has some features that we're not going to talk about today, but at the end of the day, a database is like a spreadsheet that lives online these days. And what Airbnb has is a big database with listings in it. Right? And each one of these listings lives in a row, kind of like this. And so we just made up some fake data here, but it probably looks a little bit like this in Airbnb's database, right? And there's 10,000 rows or more than that, right? I don't know how many listings they have, probably 1 million. Now, having the database alone is not good enough, right? What they need to do is be able to take that data and present it on to the web, right? That's kind of like what a web app experience is. And so Airbnb has clearly done that. What they have is this thing like a template, right? It's like a page template that looks a little bit like this, right? We took the page template and we covered up the areas that we know are like parts of the template. And each row in their database goes and fills in that data so that when you view the page, you are seeing, what we call the rendered dynamic page. So for example, this Via Avalon, the title gets put here, and the location gets put here, and the headline gets put down here. I've kind of got arrows all over the place. The sprawling tropical, whatever this is, palace, this description goes down here, and just kind of on and on. The number of guests goes over here, the price goes here, and this page gets generated from the database. Hopefully that's making sense. And what's really cool about this model is that you can actually create multiple different templates and ways of displaying that same data. So here's another example of how Airbnb probably uses that, not probably, certainly uses that same data to create a different part of the experience of their web app, right? So this is the same data, but now this is going to be like the search results page, right? If somebody were to search for like Costa Rican homes or whatever, what you get is a bunch of results on a single page. We kind of call that something like a dynamic list, and each row doesn't create a full page. Each row in this case creates one entry on this this kind of like dynamic list page. Does that make sense? Give me a yes if you understand what I'm talking about so far. Somebody say, yeah, you got this. All right. Am I confusing too much? This is probably about as complicated as it's going to get. All right. So when we fill this out, thank you. When this gets rendered, when you visit this page, those things get all filled out. And now what we have is this page of results. And of course, Airbnb's got it all fancied up so that when you click on one of these, you then go to the dynamic page that we talked about before, where you can go view the details of that individual listing. Now, this may have been obvious, like I said, to many of you. Maybe this is, it's clear that this is the only way to build a site like this now that you see it with Airbnb. But the truth is that even if this feels a little bit new, we have been using this kind of technology for years, right? Everybody's familiar with WordPress. Well, WordPress works just the same way, right? This is just a WordPress blog post that I grabbed from somewhere on the internet, from a WordPress site or something like that. And if you look at this and think about how WordPress works, what you know right away is that this is built that same way, right? WordPress, you don't go and drag the image onto the screen. You don't, type out the title and blog post copy of your content right onto the page. Instead, you do that kind of in a database, and then it gets rendered onto the page. So this is like the main image that lives back in the database. This is called the post title, and here we have the post description and the publish date and the author and the post copy, right? And just like Airbnb, here's another way of displaying that same data that lives in the database. This is the cool part of being able to separate your data from the templates, right? This is another template that's like the blog post listing template, which is all their posts. And so this is 3 different posts that use that same data. Here's that one again with a weird image of the curtain. But here's the main image, that same post title, the post description, the author, the publish date, and there it is, just rendered in like a dynamic list like we talked about. Now with all of the listings from their database. And of course, if you're familiar with WordPress, I don't use WordPress. This is probably like a 10-year-old version. I just grabbed a screenshot of WordPress from the internet. So if this is like ancient, forgive me. But I know that it looks something like this, right? It's basically a form where you're entering data into the database, right? So the post title goes up there, and the post copy goes in the big chunk in the middle there. And then if you scroll down, you'd probably be able to upload the main image and those other fields that we talked about. And again, this may be old, but at the end of the day, somewhere in WordPress is going to be a list of records like this. This is the database, the kind of the spreadsheet view of those individual posts. So this model is something that we're totally familiar with, right? What you may not have realized is that every one of these apps that you're thinking about and that we've talked about is built using these same couple of technologies. I just randomly picked Expedia. Here is in Expedia a dynamic list, 1, 2, 3, and there's presumably 7 more over there on the right, of things to do around Dubrovnik in this case, right? And if you were to click on one of those, you would go to a dynamic page where that one listing is now turned into a whole page with all the images, right? This looks just like the Airbnb page that we had talked about before, right? With the images on the top and the title and the availability and the price and the features and the highlights and all that stuff is just coming from their database of things to do, right? And so there's a dynamic page. That's Expedia is effectively a database in templates. Here we have Yelp or something like that. I think maybe Yelp. I don't know what this is, but it's restaurants, right? And here we have it again, a dynamic list horizontally. In this case, five restaurants, and it's built into a little template where it's got the image on top, and then the title, and then the number of stars, and the category, and the price, and the location, right? And then it's just repeated 5 times across the page. Each entry from the database. Now, they probably have a gigantic list of restaurants, and what they're showing here is a filtered chunk of those entries, right? They don't want to show me restaurants in New York, and they also don't want to show me restaurants that are closed for lunch today, because what it says up top here is book this for lunch today. So this is going to be like a filtered list of restaurants that are near me in Santa Barbara and are open for lunch, right? And then boom, 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 they just list those suckers out. Down here below is a list of restaurants that deliver in Santa Barbara, right? Boom, 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 boom. There they are. So again, it is more of the same. If I click on one of those suckers, boom, there it is, the dynamic page of McLean Cellars in Buellton, which is a winery nearby here, right? And this has got to hopefully by now start reminding you of that Airbnb individual listing page, right? So just a different style of template. Now, it's even stuff that you don't think is working this way is totally working this way. Here's Reddit. Reddit is like a forum. You guys know what Reddit is, some of you. It's a forum for nerds. And what we see here is a dynamic list of posts. So Reddit has a big database of posts, and they've also got a database of comments, right? And so what we have here is a list of posts, one after the other. And there might be a list in categories. I don't know. This is probably just, I don't know what this list is. But there it is. And again, it's a template that's designing how this data is going to look on the page. And if we were to click on one of those suckers, this hallucinogenic mushrooms one, now we have a dynamic page that's all about hallucinogenic mushrooms, which is fantastic. We got mushrooms here at the top. We've got the kind of more information about it, the image, and then down here we have a dynamic list of the content, the comments rather, that are sort of related to this particular post. Okay, so this is all the same stuff, just recycled and reused in different ways. So if we go back to Airbnb for a second, you'll see that it's not just, Airbnb is not just listings, right? There is, in this particular web app, a whole bunch of stuff. If you were to click on this lady Jennifer here, you would come to this page here that is a new template that is displaying a different kind of data. It's like a database about hosts, right? And if we were to look at that database, we'd see that there's different columns in that database and different data stored there. And if we were to click on elsewhere, we might see reviews, and this is a repeating dynamic list of reviews that are displayed on a page using a template. And if I clicked on this reviewer here, I would get to yet another page, which is a page that is about guests, right? Users of people that aren't hosts, people like me that go and use Airbnb, right? You notice that this is very similar to the host template that Jennifer has over here, but not exactly the same, right? She has hosting achievements, and Rachel here shows all of Rachel's reviews where Rachel's been before. Not exactly the same. So if we were to dive into Airbnb's database, it wouldn't look like a spreadsheet, it would look like a database, but they're awfully similar. And you would see that there's a bunch of different databases, right? There's going to be one about hosts like this, there's Jennifer. And then there's going to be one about guests, there's Rachel, right? And Maxime and Diane. And there's going to be another one that's about reviews that'll have a review date and the listing that it's about and the guest that posted it and stuff like that, right? And the same is even true for stuff like messages. You guys think that messages maybe are some other sort of magic thing, but it's not. Messages are actually just an entry in a database with something like an author and a message and a date. And that's what messages are. And this right here is me and Michelle and Mike talking about a rental that we're going to go to next year. And this is just another template and another way of displaying data in Airbnb. And in fact, if you kind of scratch the surface, you would find that there's all sorts of templates, listing pages and reviews pages and search results page and guest profiles and host profiles and trips listings, blah, blah, blah. And there's all sorts of databases, right? All sorts of different things that you would dig into. Now, of course, Airbnb is just an enormous app and they've got a zillion engineers. But hopefully, seeing how this works begins to reveal that there's nothing new here, right? This isn't very complicated, actually. This is a lot like WordPress, right? This is a lot like taking data from a database and dumping it onto a page, right? So that's the first concept I wanted to talk about. Now, of course, Airbnb and a lot of these apps that we talked about, Expedia, Yelp, these guys have tons and tons of data, right? That's like their business. Airbnb has every one of the listings in the world, and Yelp has all the restaurants, and Expedia has all the things to do and all the cities and towns and stuff. So the next question is about where does that data come from? And of course, you got to get it from somewhere. And without that data, there can be sort of no personalization, right? Like if you don't have the data about me and my interests, about my activities and stuff like that, and if you don't have, if you don't store the messages or the things to do, then you don't have an app, right? So gathering the data is a big piece of the puzzle here, and so I want to just mention that and get you start thinking about how you're going to collect that data. Now, there's a few ways to do it. The most obvious way is to collect it from your users using forms. And in fact, that is how Expedia and Airbnb and all these apps that we just talked about collected all that data using forms with user input, right? All those restaurant owners went and was like, I want my restaurant on there. And all the people who wanted to rent their house were like, I want my house on there. And what happens when you do it? You just say, hey, I want to host. Well, I clicked it. I don't actually want to host, but I clicked the first button. And here we go. They send you into this multi-step form that's like, okay, what are you going to rent? And obviously, if I went next and next and next, they would say, cool, where is it? What's the address? How many bedrooms does it have? And it's just a form that allows me to make entries into Airbnb's database. Does that make sense? Say yes. That makes sense, right? You guys still with me here? Yes, great. Fantastic. So same is true for Expedia, right? If you want to be a host and ride people around on kayaks or whatever, you click a button and they take you to the thing that's like, okay, what do you want to do? You want to, Expedia, look at Expedia, actually. This is interesting. I clicked on this trying trying to list my kayaking adventure or whatever. And I found that Expedia is really trying to compete with Airbnb right now. They're trying to get the lodging and the private residences. Like they're like, what do you want to list? So Expedia is putting up these forms that, and of course you click on these and it goes right to a form. It's like, what is the address? What is the, upload the photos, blah, blah, blah. There it all is, right? They're just collecting this stuff via form. Same thing is true of every one of the examples that we've talked about so far. When it comes to your users, it's the same, right? If you want to have information about a user, a lot of that information is going to come from them saying like, yeah, I'm a male and I'm 49 years old and whatever, right? I live in Santa Barbara. Okay. One of the things to be aware of is that a lot of the things that you don't think of as forms actually are forms, like messaging. I know that messaging seems like it's a separate sort of thing, but it's not. If you dive into Reddit and you wanted to be one of those nerds that creates a post about magic mushroom, you would go to a page that looks like this. And what is this? It's a form. Here it is, the title, the text, submit, right? It says post instead of submit, but like it's a fancy form, but it's effectively a form. And if you went in here and you wanted to comment on a post, what do we have here? Another form, right? It's a text field with a button that says comment instead of submit, right? So this is very simple. If you go to Facebook and you want to write a comment, what is that? It's a form. It's literally just another text field with a submit button. Actually, in this case, you hit return to submit that form. So just be aware that we're filling out forms all the time. And even things like reservations are forms. If I go back to this McLean Cellars here, it's like, I want to make a reservation. Okay, party size, date, today. There it is. It's another form, right? Very standard, basic technology that you guys can be thinking about using in your own apps for your own business. Right. There are other sets of data, though, that are important and are used all the time throughout web apps. And you need to be aware of it because you will probably want to leverage this. And one of those things is behavior tracking, right? It's a big piece of it. So Netflix undoubtedly is tracking the movies that I watch all the way to the end. And they're like, well, he likes, thrillers or whatever it is that he likes. DoorDash clearly is tracking the sort of categories of food that I like to order from. The guy's into Mexican food. What can we say? Amazon tracks product visits, right? I go, you guys know this. You go click on something on Amazon and you don't buy it. And next thing you know, Amazon is all about that thing. And you're seeing alternatives, you're seeing different prices, you're seeing sales. That is happening because those apps are tracking our behavior and they're putting us in categories and then they're displaying offers and content to us based on what they assume to be our preferences. So you can see this. I just took a screenshot of my particular Amazon page, which fortunately it wasn't too embarrassing. And what you can see is that they've figured out somehow that I am, I run a small business. I don't know why they think a coffee cup is a small business product or why Reconstitution Solution is a small business product, but okay. They put those things across the top related to items I've viewed, right? They're even telling me exactly how they've set their database up. Here's another thing, these soccer shoes related to items I've viewed. Now, they are, the other day I came and looked at some new soccer cleats and I, probably if I had purchased them, they wouldn't be showing that to me anymore, but I didn't find the ones I wanted on Amazon and I bought them somewhere else. And so now I'm going to get cleat ads for the rest of my life. Wireless accessories. Again, somebody is paying, in this case, it's a sponsored post. Somebody is paying to put their wireless accessories in front of me. Amazon could do a better job here because in this case, I did buy a new wireless system for the house. So I'm no longer in the market, but they just want the money. Get yourself a little something. These are probably things that I've looked at in the past, inspired by my purchases, right? They're even telling me this is the stuff that's similar to things you bought in the past, right? I bought I left one of my drills out in the rain and it died. So I bought a new drill, and now they're like, well, you didn't get the impact one. You didn't get the extra batteries. Probably you need to measure something too. So they have figured this. They have figured this out. But it's not just Amazon. Look at what Google is up to. Now, Google knows absolutely everything about you and me. And they actually have to be a little careful about not seeming too creepy because they know too much, right? So they keep it pretty chill on purpose, I think. And but one of the things that they definitely do is they use your location, right? So I just typed in food into Amazon just as a funny example, and what comes up? Boom, a map of my neighborhood and the restaurants that are, some of the probably the most popular restaurants in the area around here. Now, they haven't gotten so creepy as to go, like, I don't go to McDonald's. So they haven't gotten so creepy as to like, I don't go to Chick-fil-A either. I don't eat chicken. So these are not targeted at me. They're just targeted at my neighborhood. That's cool, not too creepy. If you scroll down on that page, you'll see that it's not just the map thing they put at the top. They've actually, the actual listings that are, in the search results page are like more than half of them are all about local food stuff. Food Bank SB, the food program at Santa Barbara City College, the Santa Barbara Food and Wine Company, the Santa Barbara Bowl concessions. What am I looking for? Santa Barbara Food Rescue. So clearly they're using information they have about me based on information they know, my location, to customize the experience for me. DoorDash also, right? They're even telling you right here at the top, your favorites. This is the stuff that they've tracked what I've purchased in the past, and they're showing it to me again because they're right. I'm going to keep ordering from Los Agaves until the day I die. So they put the restaurants that we order from most commonly across the top there. And then they presumably are looking at the categories of restaurants that I order from, right? So they're going, well, the kids ordered pizza one time. Here's a bunch of other pizza places that, they might be interested in, or they seem to like fish or whatever. And so here's they like health food. So here's the juicery. And now notice down here, it says national favorites. This is clearly not designed for me. Like I just told you, I don't eat at McDonald's and I don't eat chicken. So I'm not going to Wingstop. On a tough day, I might end up at Chipotle, I have to admit. But these are national favorites, not designed for me. And it says so right there, right? So part of this experience is designed for me. And clearly that makes a better user experience for me, right? Because I just go click. In fact, I don't know if you guys use DoorDash, but if I click on Los Agaves, they're like, we know what you always order. Why don't you just click order it again? And that's what I do. And it's a 2-click checkout process. Really cool, right? So good. We talked about collecting data. There's other ways to collect data. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But I just want you to begin to think about the different ways you can begin to get the information that you need to create the experiences that you want to create for your customers. A lot of possibilities there. Now, the flip side of the collecting of data is that you then have a responsibility not to screw it up. Today, exposing your users' personal data onto the internet is super uncool. Also, it can be illegal. So you do need to think about how you're using the data that you collect and how you're protecting it, right? And so there's a couple of things to think about here. First of all, click tracking, as we just talked about, is very powerful. I click around Amazon and they know all sorts of things about me, my interests and stuff like that. But you don't want to be too creepy about it, right? You don't want to be that guy who's like, hey, I saw you at the store yesterday and also at the restaurant and also coming out of the bathroom at the grocery store. That's like a weird experience, right? So we have to be careful. I like to think about it as if, I always like to kind of think about what would happen if I were using the computer at the library. And if I stood up and walked away from my computer and the next person sat down, what are they going to learn about me from what I did on that computer, right? We don't want to expose too much personal information to the last to the next user of that computer, right? Unless, of course, they are logged in. And so logging in is a whole different thing. Obviously, if I went to the library and I logged into my Airbnb account here, and then I walked away without logging out, the expectation is I've just blown it and all my personal data is exposed. If I do log out, then my personal data should not be exposed. And this is important because if you look at Airbnb here, they've got a bunch of personal information. They've got my messages. They've got all my past stays. They know, the kind of places I like to hang out. They've got my freaking American Express payments and the last 4 of my credit cards. They've got all my messages back and forth. These people, the next person in the library could literally see, where I'm going to be on a particular day or whatever it is. That's not cool to be exposing that out onto the internet. So what you've got to have is a login, right? And you can see that in this case, I'm logged in to my Airbnb account, and that's why you can see all this stuff. So one of the things you're definitely going to need to have for your app is sort of a login system so that you can positively identify people and then begin to really use that data, because that's the expectation, right? Once you're logged in, then hit me with your best shot, right? So I like to think about data in just a couple of buckets. There's category data and specific data. So things like general interests and demographic data and psychographic data, like am I a Democrat or a Republican, or am I, whatever it is, right? Or a generic location data, like I live in Santa Barbara, or demographic data, I'm a male in his 40s or whatever it is. That stuff, I think that we've generally agreed as the public that using that kind of data to personalize a web experience for somebody who's not logged in is fine, right? If you sat down and the next person saw those food suggestions in my neighborhood, that's not going to freak anybody out, right? Now, if the next person saw my home address, that's totally going to freak somebody out, right? So that's what I mean by specific data. So when you're sharing and using specific data about a person, you want to only do that in a logged in context. So things like specific interests. I'm interested in, there could be embarrassing things that I'm interested in on Amazon, right? So you wouldn't want to, show that to a non-logged in user. Personal data, obviously my phone number and my home address and stuff like that can't be shared to non-logged in users. Any data that was collected directly. So if I, messaging, if I type in, that's data, right? I type in a message, you can't share that unless the person's logged in. Specific location data, we talked about that. So that's just something to be aware of. You're going to need to think about getting people logged in. You're going to need to think about who gets to see what and when it's appropriate to use the data that you're going to collect to create these experiences. Now, we've looked at a few big things so far. We've looked at this template and data model for how to create these experiences. We've talked about how we're going to gather that data and different ways to do it. We've talked about data security, which is an important responsibility once you do start collecting all this data. But if we go back to the beginning and look at this list of features, even though this is kind of a long list, you can start to see how this list is actually a little more like this, right? The technologies that go into building those features that we just talked about actually look like this. And this is sort of the true, blueprint for how a web application works in a fundamental way, right? At the end of the day, what every one of these web applications has in common is something like there's ways to get data into a database. Stuff happens into that database. We'll talk about that in a second. We didn't talk about it yet. And then that data is used to create experiences on the web and messaging, right? So specifically, we can dive into each one of these things and look at what is entailed in kind of like getting data into your database, right? And so there's just like only a few ways of getting data into a database. We talked about some of them, right? Forms and tracking are two of the most common ways of getting data into the database. There's also logs, things like purchase history and stuff like that, click logs and stuff like that. There's obviously many applications will allow you to import data in, and of course API, adding data to databases via API or just manually typing it into the database are all very common ways of getting data into a database. And if you have those tools, well, then you have the stuff that you need to make one of these apps like Airbnb, right? Now, you got to have the database though as well. And the database isn't just, a spreadsheet. There is a bit more to it than that, right? You need to be able to, create new databases on, like Airbnb has a whole list of them, right? And you need to be able to create and edit the fields in each one of those databases. And there's some stuff we didn't talk about here today. You need to be able to create relationships between the various databases that you've created. And then some of the other stuff that is obvious, but you need to think about it, right? Scalability and availability. It needs to not go down. It needs to be able to handle, 1,000 users at once or whatever you might need. It needs to be secure and not be easily broken into. And of course, access and permission is a big piece of it, right? You need to let certain people in to that data and not others, right? It would be a big problem if I were able to log into Airbnb and see every other user's data in Airbnb, right? That would not work, right? There'd be lawsuits. So there needs to be ways of going like, okay, this guy logged in and he now has access to this chunk of data. But now if an administrator logs in that works for Airbnb, they need to be able to go in and see a different set of data, right? Maybe not all of it, but that kind of functionality is what you need to create an app like Airbnb. And if you had these features in a database, you pretty much have what you need to create that stuff. All right. Now, this transform is a piece that we haven't really talked about. It's only slightly more complicated, but basically, this has everything to do with automation. There's concepts in databases called triggers, database triggers, and it's kind of the if-then stuff. So, if somebody, makes a if somebody creates a new user, send them an email that says, welcome new user. Or if somebody books a property, send something here, or show that this is no longer available, right? So it's kind of like, if this is true, then do this. When this happens, then do this. There's some other calculations and roll-ups and the ability to search and sort and copy and paste, just kind of some functions around the data as it's sitting in your database that you need to have access to create most of these apps. We're not going to get into that today, but you can kind of see how there's some tools that you need to have to work on the database to make some of these web apps work. And the last one here is this data out piece. And this is the piece that most of these guys who are claiming to be in the no-code web app development space really lack. They may, JotForms is cute that they've made a form builder and are calling it a no-code web app builder, but really that's just this piece right here, right? They've got forms and they've got a database, and they can kind of like store the data, and that's sort of it. But they're not taking that data, they're not transforming that data, they're not using that data to create personalized experiences, right? So that's really where the appness of the thing comes in, is when you get to use that data to create these streamlined, personalized experiences. And so there's different places that you need to be able to kind of take and use that data. And one of them, of course, is in messaging. You need to be able to say, send out a message that says, hey, Landon Ray just booked your place in Santa Barbara. Here's his, click here to say hi, or whatever it might be, right? That is a dynamic message that is driven by the database, right? So messaging is one place where you need to be able to take that data and send it out. Of course, an API is another way, right? An API is a two-way sort of data pipe, so you can integrate other systems. You need to be able to show the data to an internal user, right? So that's what I mean by in-app here. Is you need to be able to show data to an internal user. Somebody who works at Airbnb needs to be able to look at the database and stuff like that. And then, of course, the biggest piece is the web and mobile. where you're taking that data and filling out templates, right? And actually presenting that data on the web and on a cell phone. So what's really interesting is at the end of the day, all of these features that we've talked about are buildable using these particular functions: data into a database, some ability to transform the data, and then take that data and use it in specific ways. And here's what's really interesting and pretty exciting is that when you look at all this, if you're an Ontraport user, you may recognize that tracking and API and manually adding data and the ability to import data, the ability to build forms, and a lot of collecting of logs is all features that Ontraport already has. And if you look at the database, we already have custom objects and the ability to add fields and create relationships between objects. We have the scalability, of course, the ability to store and manage millions of records at a time. We've got the security in place. We've got all sorts of access and permission management in place already. These are already features of Ontraport. And you may notice that this stuff, if then, when this happens, copy and paste, search and sort, calculate and roll up, most of this stuff is already features that are built into Ontraport's automated campaign builder. And lastly here, we have the data out. Ontraport's really good at some of this stuff. Clearly, you can sift and sort and manage that data in the app itself. If you log into your Ontraport account, boom, you have beautiful access to all of your data and ways to manage that data and look at it and segment it and everything you could possibly need in the app itself. We also have extremely powerful messaging capabilities. So you can take that data and merge it into messages and send it out the door, right? We also have one of the most robust APIs in the industry that has, I don't know, 100 endpoints more. Actually, endpoints get created as you create new databases. It's a very sophisticated API. But one of the things that you may have already picked up is that this last bit is a piece that's missing for Ontraport. We have a web page builder that allows you to build pages in that kind of old school way where you drag an image onto the page. But what we don't have is the ability to create dynamic templates and take that data and fill those templates and create those kind of dynamic experiences that are so typical of every web app that we've talked about today. And so this is actually what we've been working on for the last year or so. And what that means is that in a minute, you're going to be able to build a web app like Airbnb in Ontraport, and you're going to also be able to build something like a forum or a blog or a learning management system or a million other apps that you can imagine. And you'll be able to do it without writing a single line of code, which makes this a very legitimate no-code web app builder. What's super exciting about that is that if you can begin to imagine what that might mean, if we could really get to where building web applications were, something that your typical Ontraport user could handle themselves. And a typical Ontraport user is a somewhat sophisticated, but definitely not a coder, not an engineering. We did a survey recently where we asked people about their technical savvy, and something like 85% of you were like, I'm technical, but I'm not a coder, right? Imagine a world where instead of 1 or 2% of people that currently can build apps, right? Engineers. What if it were 10 times that number? What if it were 20 times that number? People who aren't engineers that just have a little, like who have enough technical understanding that we've gotten through this conversation without getting overwhelmed. Imagine if you could build an app. What if instead of delivering websites, static websites, you could deliver fully interactive, personalized web apps to your customers? So That's what I want you to think about over the next week. We have here in America, we have Thanksgiving coming up in the next week. So we're putting a pause on this conversation for the following, for all of next week. But the Tuesday after that, which is going to be November the 30th, we're going to resume this conversation. And at that point, I'm going to show you specifically what it is that we've been doing. And in the meantime, what I would love is for you to begin thinking about how could you create a personalized online experience that delivers value for your customers? What would it be that would have you delivering an experience that gives your prospects and customers that feeling that this is made for them, right? That this is going to be a solution that works faster because it's tailored specifically to me. That feels like it's part of the 21st century instead of the 20th century, that stands out from the crowd of people in your industry by delivering a streamlined and slick experience that is akin to what we are used to in 2021. Let's bring that conversation to the Facebook community over the next week and start to brainstorm, what could you build if you had the tools, if you didn't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars and find engineers to, and write specs and kind of all that stuff that you got to do. What could you build for your own business that would make a difference? So until then, let's bring it to the Facebook community. Let's chat again a week from Tuesday, which is November 30th. We'll do it at 2:30 p.m. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thank you guys for watching. And we will talk soon. With that, I'm going to leave it. I hope that this thing recorded.